How do you deal with, porn, obesity? How do you deal with that on a state level? What do you do? You're in the government right now. You're the president. What do you do?
I would say, and I have a whole dissertation, it's called, on this, by the way, on my channel. We go through all the scientific research for 2 hours. If you don't believe me, porn is literally like a weapon. It's a drug, and it's destroying your brain.
It's been used in Israel as a particular form of weaponry.
And even in like World War II, for example, it's demoralizing. They would drop propaganda of soldiers being ravaged by the enemy force because it demoralizes you. Even from an amoral perspective, ignoring the religious aspect of it, you're watching some other guy, have sex with a chick. Presumably that's what you would like to be doing. And it does actually take a toll on you mentally. It hijacks your brain's reward circuitry. It makes you depressed. So if you're a young man and you're watching, and for whatever reason you feel depressed, you feel like you don't have a lot of energy, it's tough for you to sleep, you can't make eye contact, you're socially anxious. There's literally scientific evidence proving that could be because of porn. Don't believe me? Watch the video.
And short-term pleasures as well, which people are more open to. And it also just destroys and fries your dopamine sectors in your brain. And I agree. That's the problem. Like obesity, it's a big problem. How do you, I understand, we get it. How do you deal with this problem as like a status?
If a status, I wouldn't say I'm a status, but from like a state level,
wanting a state doesn't mean you're a status.
You could easily pass.
You're a status too, Ghost Girl.
Okay,
you could easily pass legislation just simply regulating it the same way that we regulate CP. Okay, if you're going to watch this, maybe you're 18 years old, fine, but we're going to make it so minors can't access it, because the average age that children are being exposed to it when their brains are the most plastic and malleable is like 9 years old, and that's assuming a normal distribution, which means 50% are even younger than 9 years old, and the effects of that are very bad. I mean, now it's even tough for them to do studies on people's brains because they can't find a control group who hasn't been exposed to pornography because it's so pervasive. And so I think you could easily regulate it like that, and people want to say, oh, well, I don't want to have to put in my driver's license to like watch porn. It's like, dude, 9-year-old, who cares? If you want to like jerk off to something depraved, like fine, but like we're trying to protect kids here. And there is something to be said about establishing barriers. Like you used to have to go to the VHS store, things like that. Making it more difficult for people to do things that are bad is good. Or even with the food, you go to Europe, you lose 10 pounds. Why is that?
Yeah.
They don't put crap in their food like we do. And we've tried so hard to find the villain, whether it's fats, carbohydrates, red meat. The villain is that you're eating chemicals that your body doesn't know how to digest.
Yeah, it's predominantly because of Bill Gates and Monsanto buying up the lobbyist industry and going after the regulators and putting their people in charge that allows them to do all this crazy stuff.
Yes.
But, this is the problem, because it does need to be dealt with, and I think these are quantifiable problems that do need to be addressed.
We hear this a lot, and it's come up quite a bit, that there are people we know, friends of people who work here, who say that when they're outside the U.S., they eat this diet, that they eat their normal diet, and they're thin. They come to the U.S. and they eat the same food, and they gain 30 pounds over, like, instantly. And then we were like, oh, maybe you don't realize the portions are bigger. Maybe you started drinking. And the response I hear all the time is like, no, I eat the same thing. And then we even had one person be like, when I went back home for 6 months, the weight vanished. Like, dude, I'm eating the same thing.
Yeah,
and people are adamant about it.
I don't know. People also just lack a lot of willpower these days.
No,
and then blame it on
the ingredients.
Are,
no,
like, I know that there are toxic ingredients in food, but also like, just shut your mouth and stop eating.
No, the ingredients are banned in Europe. You can't
I understand
have the
that
same
they have stricter
ingredients
regulations, and I want us
States.
to have stricter regulations on it, but also like just have some more willpower.
Well, here's the thing. I think as an American, you should be able to just like be lazy and go to a McDonald's and get a burger without having to worry about it like poisoning you and making you like effeminate. I think you should be able to do that, but you can't do that now in this country because nobody has the balls to take on.
In moderation, you absolutely can do that.
But people are stupid. No one's ever going to be like, I mean, look at the average weight of like a man in this country. I would love if people could do that, but they just won't.
And it's going up dramatically.
So here's the issue though. If people are not apt enough, savvy enough, knowledgeable enough to avoid eating that garbage, is it the responsibility of the government to ban them from eating it?
I believe so, absolutely. I mean, that's what is the government's job. That's not to look out for the people.
That's Mike Bloomberg's position.
So, yes, with the soda, right?
And I'm not inherently saying you're wrong. I'm just letting you know, like, Bloomberg, right, he wanted to ban sodas, sugary drinks, and he even went as far as to say tax the poor because they buy things that are bad for them. So we should take more of their money away and then spend it on things that are good for them.
Yeah, that I don't think I would want to tax it, but I think there are ways to cut subsidies to things that are bad and redirect redirect them towards things that are good. You know, the American diet in the 1950s, now we would scoff at like, oh, all this red meat and everything. They were significantly healthier than we are now. I mean, we are eating literal poisons and endocrine disruptors and cancers, and we wonder why everybody's so depressed. The two things that your brain is the most wired to pursue, food and sex, have been hijacked such that now, like we said, the average American is an overweight, like hypersexual, porn-addicted slob. That's not good.
With no impulse control.
I went to a restaurant, and for dessert they had a bread pudding, and I was like, oh, that sounds good. Like, you guys have had bread pudding before, right?
Yeah.
It was basically, they brought it out. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever eaten in my life, mind you. And it was it was very small, but it was 6 Krispy Kreme donuts compressed into a small cake and then covered with sweetened condensed milk and like a cherry. And then I was like, I tried it and I was like, this tastes like Krispy Kreme. I was like, wait a minute. You could see that it was like they took a half dozen donuts. It's got to be like 1,200 calories in this thing. That's wild. That's insane. It was like a regular dessert for one person.
Yeah. So just to,
it was delicious.
If I could surmise your argument, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
You're saying human beings are imperfect. They can't rule their own lives, so we need government to rule the lives for them. But isn't the government made up of those same imperfect individuals with those same weaknesses?
That's my argument is not that, like, you know, people can't be trusted with liberty, people can't be trusted with freedom. I'm saying that this stock of people that we've assembled because we have failed to prevent evil forces from instituting evil things is now at a state where I'm not saying they can't be trusted with freedom. I think people are able to feed themselves. I just think that we should, and we do have an obligation to, cut off the ability of people to be able to destroy themselves as easily with mainly, cigarettes, that's fine, but with food, with pornography, things like that. It's like, yeah, I think that the government should step in and just make food real again, make sex real again, make people have relationships again. It is possible to at least redirect the trends.
I agree with you on the problems, but the government, I would argue, created a lot of those problems, incentivized a lot of those problems, allows a lot of those problems, and this is why I don't think the state is going to solve those problems, and I think it should be on an individual level.
You're talking about a state led by John Doyle, though. So
real
if
trust
we're
the
lucky.
plan.
Now, hold on. So I think you're both right. Luke, you've recognized that we have a government that is doing bad things. That doesn't mean we just say instantly that all social pact or social contract is impossible. The issue is that corruption takes hold and something has to be done about it. So I view it like this. What you're saying is deeply nuanced, John. You're talking about poisoned food and all these really corrupt things. They're hard to see. But at the root, there's something simple. Let's say you have a small village of 100 people. The anti-statist absolutist, and this is, I'm not trying to make a straw man, but if you're absolutely anarchic and like, no, there should be no authority, no state, governments are bad, and they always cause problems. A barbarian horde comes in and they destroy everything. There's no social understanding, there's no pact. Or a fire burns down a house and people say, screw you, I'm not going to help you. No. The earliest form of government isn't inherently a bad thing. It's the centralization of authority and the corruption of government that's a bad thing. If you have a small village of 100 people, and there's a social understanding between all of them as to how things are run, what is okay and what isn't, you've got the basics of governance, your community. The problem is we have no community left in this country. It's been totally shattered.
Yeah.
And thus, what we're seeing now with the Democrats and the Republicans, they're calling it the basement strategy. Katie Hobbs didn't campaign. They just said, get as many votes as possible. It doesn't matter what you say to these people. No longer are elections based on the social contract. They're based on playing to the rules to the best of the ability of the player. Republicans didn't understand this in the midterms, still managed to get the House. Now they're starting to realize that, hey, you don't need to campaign at all. Just get enough people to collect as many votes as possible in whatever the legal mean is, door to door as certified caregivers, and get people to vote for you. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
That's not a tenable government. That's not going to work.
Yeah. There's also something to be said about the political incentive that we have, because so much of what the left does, like we hit on earlier, is just create and manufacture the victim narratives, and everybody's a victim, everyone's in despair. And if you look at like what unites these people, it's much less ideology and much more just this shared misery and hatred against those who they cast as like their dad or whoever was like mean to them in their life or something. And when you have a person who is overweight, whose dopamine has been fried, they're depressed, that person is so much more likely to want to sympathize and resonate with those victim narratives because they tell themselves through their narcissism, like, because somebody like looked at me once in a Victoria's Secret because I'm overweight, I'm like just as oppressed as black people or something like that. And when you have people who are overweight, especially young people, we're so overweight now, where's the revolution going to be fought? I mean, the young people are the future. Testosterone too, because of the endocrine disruptors in the food, is down 40% in the last 40 years. When your testosterone goes down, you become more agreeable. Your amygdala in your brain, these chemicals have been shown over time to shrink your amygdala, which is the part of your brain that is responsible for saying things like no. And not coincidentally, the average person in this country has been far more agreeable to things that would be unthinkable to our grandparents' generation. So I believe that people can be trusted with liberty, but I also think that we should probably stop evil people from doing evil things. And then if people want to overeat, that's fine, but they do have an incentive to make you fat and weak and depressed.
Let me ask you a question, Luke, right? A serious question. In like an anarchist city, like or in a place like Sharon, how do they deal with someone who is coming in with a gun and robbing people?
They have community networks of people who actually are security guards who are responsible for the mutual protection. So coming in the city, you go through, a checkpoint, and you can't have any kind of political signs. You can't have any kind of political ideology, and they have a community watch, which protects them. And the crime has gone down absolutely dramatically. They haven't had a murder in many years now. And when they deal with crime, they deal with it in a sensible level. Where, of course, if someone is doing a crime because of an addiction, they help that person deal with the addiction rather than, of course, just punishing them and making them worse criminals.
How do they deal with fraud?
I don't have any examples of that particular example at all, so I don't know.
So the challenge is, it's really easy to be like, obviously taking someone's belongings is a bad thing, and we've developed civics around how to deal with these things. Can you prove it? Are there witnesses? The standards vary from country to country, but typically if I take something from you, I am causing damage to you. We understand that. If I strike you and there are witnesses saying you instigated the fight, we understand that. But what if you're doing something that's like scamming them out of their money? Something like that's fraudulent in the United States, deception in order to steal their resources.
I'll ask my contacts in Sharon and come back to you with a particular answer on that. But
the reason I ask is because some things are illegal that some people think shouldn't be illegal, and some things are legal that should be illegal. And how is that understood by the people of Sharon? For instance, what if someone buys 10 roosters and puts them in their house and they're screaming all day long? Clearly, people are going to be upset with that. What if someone goes outside and gets an LRAD and just blasts the sound at the top? Is it because they say, we've determined what you're doing to be unreasonable, regardless of whether or not we've agreed you can't do it? Obviously, blasting an LRAD device is damaging. But hey, come on, I want roosters. No, you can't tell me I can't have roosters. They're my animals, and I'm going to eat them, and I need them.
Yeah.
So if I'm not arguing for outright authoritarianism, but I do think a basic understood social contract where we understand each other is a valuable thing.
Yeah, it's just simple. The one of the main principles of anarchist is don't take people's stuff, don't steal, and don't hurt other people. And I think if we just live by those principles and we respect those principles, the world would be different. And when it comes to especially what's happening with modern males, I would argue that there is an agenda meant to demasculate people, meant to destroy people, meant to create a public that is never going to stand up against the tyranny of the state, meant to, of course, make them acquiesce with everything, like you said. And it's not just testosterone levels, it's also sperm levels, it's also grip strengths. We are being biologically attacked top down in almost every element of our life that is destroying modern manhood to the point where women now have better grip strength and even more testosterone than most males.
No,
so
that's not true.
Why is it important for women to become more disagreeable?
That's not true, Luke. That is not true. We've actually talked about grip strength on this show and pulled up studies showing the relative grip strength, in specifically referring to the differences between males and females. Males have stronger grip strength.
Absolutely, but now this kind of chart is changing, right? So now,
males have stronger average grip strength, but the average grip strength of women is going up.
Right.
Yes, and so the same with the testosterone levels.
So why is that important? Like, why would it be important for women to become more disagreeable and have more testosterone? It's not. I'm just. If that's part of a planned agenda.
What I'm describing here is the takeover of the state, because I think at the end of the day, the state is doing this because the state needs people to acquiesce with it, and the state has an agenda that is pushing the communist agenda to have more people that they could rule over, because again, the government, the state is a corporation. They want to make sure they have the most clients. Who's going to be the best client of the state? The people who need it the most. And this is why there's been an agenda to make the people need the state more and more than ever.
I agree with that. I think that this state is hostile towards the people over whom it governs, but I don't think it's because it is the state. I think it's because it was infiltrated by communists, and communists are evil people. Like, that's what they want. They want global communism. They're very open about this. It's conspiratorial when we say it, but then you read the forums in the World Economic Forum, they're like completely open about it.
They brag about it. They write dissertations and papers saying we need global control, we need totalitarianism, and the way that they take over society is by weakening the modern man.
This seems to get back to the point that we were talking about earlier with, like, okay, we have the state, it sucks, it's hostile towards us. Well, now what do? What are we supposed to just tell it should delete itself? Are we supposed to take power and then delete the state? Like, I don't think that anarchy has an actual answer to the problem, because like you said, if everyone just stopped stealing, everything would be fine. So true. Now try to tell that to like illegal aliens. What are you going to hand them, like copies of like Thomas Paine literature and be like, hey, you should really, read some of this stuff. They just aren't receptive to it.
Without the welfare state, we wouldn't have a lot of this immigration.
That's true.
So I think that's another argument that deserves to be made here, specifically when it comes to the state incentivizing a lot of this nonsense, incentivizing a lot of these divide and conquer agendas. Again, no one has the perfect solution here, but at the end of the day, I think the more pragmatic thing is calling for decentralization of power, not centralization of power, giving people more opportunities to move away from this fifth generational warfare that's affecting them. Because the more you empower the state, the more you empower the agenda against yourself.
I think that's true. I also think there is something to be said about taking over the state and like using it to benefit ourselves. And, we had a good system in this country. It wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better than the system we have now. And I think if we allow that stock of people to retain power, things would be far better off for everybody.
I respect your opinion. You make very good arguments, but I believe that's a pipe dream.
Well, all right. I guess we'll see.
I think, one thing I've learned over the past several years is that there is no endpoint. Or I suppose I should say it's a developed idea I've learned more and more about over a long period of time. But, I often say the ends don't justify the means because you never meet the ends, which is to say that you may come up with this document that says, like, here's the perfect government. And on paper, it makes sense. You begin to implement it and things improve. 100 years later, you live in a corrupt garbage country based on that document, and people are like, see, it didn't work. And you're like, no. It worked for as long as it did. And then humans are fallible creatures. That's just it. The assumption that humans can adhere to a perfectly rigid system is just not the case.
Yeah. And so this is sort of, I think, the crossroads we're at, where it's like, okay, either we keep telling people that small government is the answer, things like that, and then maybe one of these days we somehow manage to get the government to shrink, or we decentralize the power, or we actually try to do what they did, the long march through the institutions, take back power, and then the argument is, well, then what's to stop them from doing it? Okay, then we're back at square one. We voted all our guys into office, and then they become communists, and then we're just back at square one.
I'm going to back Luke with one simple solution. I think you'll agree in a sense. Let me ask you this. If every single person in this country was a conservative Christian, would you need police?
At a very small scale.
Right. The issue really is, are we a cohesive culture?
Yeah.
Do we agree with each other? Do we have the same values? If you have a community that shares its values, you really don't have to, you can leave your doors open. Assuming your values are like, don't harm other people, don't steal from them. The problem is we have no shared values, so people are turning to government for the solution, when the solution is actually cultural. So I agree with you with a long march through the institutions. We need our media apparatus mostly to basically speak to people and tell them, like, here are the things that we share. And I don't mean like a top-down broadcast tower of like the 5 journalists. I mean, we need a dominant culture to emerge, explain why what it does works, win the arguments, win the institutions, and then say, like, this is what we as a community are here for. And then I don't think you need to rely on powerful governments or big government.
And what's interesting about that too is, like, the biggest, or I should say the closest that we came to really living in that kind of post-racial society was probably after 9/11. I mean, everybody was united under the American flag, maybe for the wrong reasons. So maybe something to talk about later.
We don't want to talk about that one.
You had things like, the Chappelle Show, for example, and Dave's still relevant, where he was making fun of every group equally, pretty much. You had things like WWE. Everyone loved Eddie Guerrero. Like, John Cena put out a rap album.
But
you were allowed to.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to address the one point before we move on from it. There were a lot of Arabic people who were being discriminated against and feared because of terror.
Well, I should say post-racial in the sense of
Sikhs as well.
America's always been pretty much a biracial country, and then Hispanics started coming here after 65. But yeah, there was a lot of anti-Arab discrimination. But in terms of the traditional American demographics, I guess I would say we really did kind of have a period where it seemed like it wasn't going to be as problematic. And then now they refuse to let us acknowledge those differences, which do exist, because they believe that all people are fundamentally the same. Yeah. And so you can't joke about them, you can't acknowledge them, and if you do, you get canceled.
Yeah, I think also, just to continue this kind of larger conversation, I wasn't prepared for a debate, but when you made those pothead statements, those are shots fired.
You're like, hey man.
No, I don't smoke weed. I don't use weed personally myself. But I do think one of the weaker elements of anarchy and libertarianism is when it comes to specifically children. I do believe children deserve to be protected. I do believe that there should be elements and institutions in charge that protect children from what's online, from other predators, from other people taking advantage of them, from other people trying to hurt them psychologally, physically, and mentally.
Who was was it Austin Peterson?
He was on the debate stage when someone said legalize heroin for children, and he said no, and he's known as the guy saying no to legalizing heroin for children. They booed him because he said he wouldn't do that. Now again, I think there should be protections for children, obviously, because children aren't consenting adults, and I think there's a lot of predators out there.
A lot of libertarians would call that into question too.
Absolutely,
exactly, and this is where I stand differently. This is where I disagree with some of the larger ethos and the larger philosophies. I just wanted to make that clear because we're talking about this, and I think it's a fascinating conversation.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.